Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is the weekend edition, and of course, you're going to enjoy the roundtable discussion taking place today. First of all, let me once again bring back to the microphone Dr. Merrill Matthews, resident scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation. And next week, when I have one speaking engagement, you'll be sitting in this chair, and thank you for doing that ahead of time.
I will be, and I'm looking forward to it.
And then we might even talk about one of those Molly Hemingway. So we'll get
Molly
into
Hemingway,
that.
yes, and we'll be talking about the COP26.
Yes, we'll get into some of those issues, and we are so privileged to bring back to the microphone. It's been a while. Debbie Georgatos, of course, a lawyer, political consultant, of course, the host of America Can We Talk. Man, it's been a long time.
It has been a long time. It's so nice to be here in your beautiful studio. Love this show. Thank you for having me.
And we look forward to these conversations that we'll have with the two of them, but also with you. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. As you know, we've this week suggested that you might want to contact your member of Congress about the Build Back Better Act. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, I'm going to come to you first, because that's the first article by you, The Attack of the Killer Taxes. Before we got on the air, we were talking about some of these other killer tomatoes and shrews and all sorts of other things. So if you're a science fiction buff, you'll love that. But this tax issue, I want to hear from you. And then I know that Debbie Georgatos is loaded to bear on talking about this one today. So what do we need to know?
Well, the tax bill, we don't know what's in the tax bill. We've got what was going to be a $6 trillion Build Back Better bill that got reduced down to $3.5 trillion. That now apparently is $1.75 trillion. But it'll be much more than that if they actually get it passed.
Yes.
And of course, here Kerby, I have never been so disgusted with the leadership, if you want to call it that, in Washington. It is unbelievable. They're looking at the biggest spending and taxing legislation we've seen since the Great Society, maybe more. That was in 1965.
That's right.
Maybe more. We don't know yet because it hasn't been put together. And they're doing this on the fly, and they're saying, we want to spend all this money. Shall we try this tax? Well, we're not sure that tax is going to work. Maybe we try this. Well, no, that may be unconstitutional. That never stopped us, but let's go ahead and try it anyway. Who knows? Maybe we'll get it passed. Maybe John Roberts will step in there and say it's okay. It's just amazing. I've never seen anything like this, and you and I have been watching this for a long time.
I might just mention that the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal called it fly-by-night taxation, and they said, look, Democrats have always been the party of taxation, but at least when you had tax writers like Dan Rostenkowski or Lloyd Benson, Rostenkowski from Illinois, Benson from Texas, at least these were serious people. Debbie Georgatos, I keep saying on this program, these are not serious people.
They are not serious people. I think among the most egregious things they're considering is a tax on, and this was actually Washington Post even had an opinion piece saying, this doesn't sound like a very good idea. It's a tax on unrealized capital gains. And a very simple example I gave on my show was, it's like if you purchase $1,000 of stock in one company, and then while you're owning it, it goes up to $5,000 in value, but you don't sell it. So you haven't realized the income from it. And then it drops down to $1,000. They want to tax you at the level that you never realized the capital gains. That's a very simplistic example. But what it really strikes me as is just this, it's a disincentivizing for investing in the stock market because you don't want to have those unrealized gains. And it's a little akin, and I know Buddy's a great financial guy. He can maybe agree or disagree, but it's kind of like a tax on net worth. is saying, well, you do have it and you could have done something. It is outrageous, probably unconstitutional, and just the most egregious assault on free markets.
And you don't know how. Debbie's point is you don't know how much it's worth.
Right.
If you were an investor in Bitcoin, you can buy little bitty bits of Bitcoin these days. It goes up $3,000, $10,000, $50,000 in a week, and then drops back down to almost nothing. The meme stocks that were going on earlier this year, GameStop and AMC movie theaters, they would shoot up 20, 30%, sometimes double in a day, and then drop back down. So the question is, when do you evaluate that? Do you?
And do you get a refund if it goes down?
That's my next point.
and then Donald Trump has got a new media company out there that shot up immediately and made, I think, doubled or tripled in value over a couple of days, and then it went back down a little bit. I think it may be back up. I don't know. But it's just, how do you determine what the value of that is?
Yeah, on what day? And I love that you made that point. So what if you're the one who did the $1,000 and then it went up to $5,000 in value, but then it went down to $10. Does the government have to reimburse you then? Because I mean, it's the craziest thing. And but I do think the larger point about it, it's a mentality that says any way we can zap the rich, tax the rich, make investment in the stock market unappealing. Right? It's a mindset.
And that's just the point there. They're doing everything they can to try to figure out how to get some money in here.
Of course.
So let's negotiate or change prescription drugs out there. Well, no. Kirsten Sinema doesn't want to do that, so we can't do that. Let's tax billionaires. Well, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe we can tax millionaires. Maybe we can do a wealth tax. It's just amazing that they've got all this spending they want to do, and they're trying within the matter of a few hours to come up with some kind of taxes that they can use to pay for this. Wanted to do a carbon tax? Well, no.
That's not
Senator
popular.
Manchin nixed that idea. So how do you come up with all this money that you want to try to be able to spend, because Biden said this won't cost anything?
Yes. Well, and again, just a question I have. You called it a wealth tax, and yet Janet Yellen, who is the head of the Fed and now is the Treasury Secretary, said it's not a wealth tax. Who do we believe here?
Well, I'd go with Buddy
Nancy
Matthews.
Pelosi? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And for our younger listeners, you just sometimes have to come back and say, there was a time when, even if Ronald Reagan didn't always agree with some of the things happening in the 1980s, we still had a sense that there were serious people trying to write a tax bill. And now you just have it made up day after day.
Right. And it's only to try to come up with something. And then if they do decide to come up with something, then they've got the issue of running it by the Congressional Budget Office, because it has to be done that way, supposed to be. And then the Congressional Budget Office has to weigh in on this and say, and then if and then they'll go back when the Congressional Budget Office says it's really not paid for, they'll go back and make some stuff up. So the taxes start now, but the benefits don't start for a year or two.
Is the most astonishing thing, and it is a little bit like that. I can't remember whether it was Obama who set up, but just kind of, EBGB economics, voodoo economics. There's no substance behind it.
Yeah.
No substance behind the ideas, and the kind of notion, well, if we have more spending, we'll just print more money. That's been going on in Washington. It's so unserious. It's like the unserious states of America.
And one of the other things that we've talked about is that if indeed you did have a wealth tax, it's not the first time we've tried this. We quoted earlier in the week of the number of states and countries, but we'll just use France as one example of having a wealth tax, and they lost, hundreds of billionaires. So Ron Wyden, he's got that covered, and that is if the billionaires move abroad, then they have to, and renounce their citizenship, they still have to pay the unrealized gain on their profit, and they have to pay it right away. They can't even postpone it. They have thought of everything. By the way, the phones are already ringing, so I might as well open up the phones. First person wants to say they'd heard that the Biden administration's considering paying reparations to illegal immigrants. Oh, no, that can't be right. No, of course it is. And anyway, the phones are already ringing, so 1-800-351-1212. We will cover all of these issues, but we do need to take one of those mandatory breaks. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The latest news out of China has been a cause for concern and perhaps a wake-up call to consider what the communist leaders are planning. China tested a hypersonic, nuclear-capable missile. Hypersonic vehicles travel at Mach 5 or faster. They're not defensive weapons and fly in the low atmosphere, enabling them to evade defense systems. One source said, "We have no idea how they did this." One report said that the test revealed that China was far more advanced than U.S. officials realized. The test raised new questions about why the U.S. often underestimated China's military modernization. Yes, that's a good question. This country has more than a dozen intelligence agencies. They all seem surprised by the latest revelation. That raises the question of why we're spending so much money on agencies that were surprised by the collapse of Afghanistan and surprised by the military advances in China. Hypersonic missiles are uniquely suited to defeat our missile defense systems. We can't counter them, especially since we would have enough problem even tracking them. An MIT professor hastened to add that just because China tested this missile capability doesn't mean they plan to deploy it. But I would recommend that professor stick to science and technology, because the history of communist governments is that they will likely use advanced weaponry either directly on countries or as a means of intimidating other governments. By the way, this latest news follows the discovery of hundreds of new missile silos in the Chinese desert, likely dug for nuclear missiles. This isn't the behavior of a country merely trying to improve its defensive capabilities against other nations. Each of these disturbing revelations should be a wake-up call to our leaders. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is Weekend Edition, and we already have phone calls coming in here, so we will try to get to those. But a good example of this smart audience that we have, they already want to talk about such issues as the proposal, as hard as it is to believe, that the Biden administration wants to pay reparations to illegal immigrants. One caller wants to talk about China. Of course, my commentary today is about the China missile surprise and the whole issue of Taiwan, which, of course, is in the October Outlook magazine. So we'll get to those in just a minute. But we're at the moment on killer taxes. We haven't even gone down to the next couple of issues. But there is a part of this that's really troubling, Dr. Matthews, and that is you've seen so many different attempts to try to figure out where to get more money, and one of those that has generated probably the most response from some of our listeners is the IRS gets to look at $600 transaction. Mm-hmm. The Senate Democrats saying, okay, that's maybe too intrusive, so we'll just look at anybody that spends $10,000 a year, which is the same thing. Maybe don't look at the individual transactions, but I just don't feel real good about having the IRS looking over my bank account or yours either.
You know, I think that's absolutely right. And of course, once they do that, now they have an excuse to come in and do audits or anything else if they think if you are a dissenter, you don't agree with the Democratic policy out there, they decide to step in there and we'll put a little pressure on you to make sure you understand who's the big guy in town these days and who you ought not to be dissenting from. And they do this. Congress does this when it's run by Democrats all the time. Happened during the Obamacare legislation when several insurance companies said, we're not sure we want to go this direction. The head of the Ways and Means Committee and other committees said, we need you to go and give us some information. And I talked to one CEO one time. He said, I've got a stack of red files on my desk of the information they want. He said, there's no point in this. We can give them the information, but it just takes a lot of time. It's a hassle, and it's a way to say, you need to get on board with the plan now.
It is outrageous on the idea of because what they're saying, the Biden team is saying that they would get banks to give them that information. And it is just circumventing the Fourth Amendment protection you're supposed to have before the government can search your home. You know, you have to have a warrant and you have to show probable cause. And so they're really searching your private property, which, even though it's your bank instead of you, they're still using the bank to circumvent the Fourth Amendment. I actually hope that this would be ruled unconstitutional, were it to be, it's just the IRS going on a fishing expedition, which is in many cases the reason you can get search warrants struck down, because the government doesn't have probable cause. And as many people have noted, any tax person worth their salt could look at anyone's tax records and find something that arguably is illegal, because it isn't clear, like 2 + 2 is 4. There are all sorts of choices you make in your tax filings and what's deductible, what can be characterized in a certain way. If they get into your bank, they will find something that they could question is legality.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in addition to this, they'd become the determiners of whether or not this is appropriate. And that's why on the wealth tax or other things of that nature, it becomes an issue of, well, I had a stock and I sold it for this amount. Well, we think it was worth more than that. Mm-hmm. Or I had some land that I had as investment property and I sold that. I don't, but I mean, so somebody has some land, they sell some land, and they said, you sold that for X number of dollars. We think it was worth a lot more, and you probably had money shuffled to you from that. If you want to find how that works, read Michelle Malkin on Joe Biden from some years ago when he was talking about some of the real estate deals that Joe Biden did and selling his house for a whole lot more than you think it might have been worth in the market and being able to buy a house for a whole lot less in the market. You can do a lot of things if you have power, or you can overlook a lot of things if you have power.
And again, we've seen this before, where if you were to assume that members of Congress probably aren't as good at picking stocks as people on Wall Street, it's amazing how many of them always seem to pick the right stocks and always seem to do extremely well. And so the insider trading that has existed for years in Congress is allowed. But if you and I did it, of course, we know what would happen there. So the one other point before we move on is just simply, do we have the money or the resources or the finances now to even talk about, even if it's now less than $2 trillion. It seems to me, Dr. Merrill Matthews, every time we turn around, we're printing more money around.
Well, the flip side of that coin was that they wanted to hire, 60,000 IRS agents, I think it was something, 30,000, some huge number of IRS agents that Joe Biden said, we've got wealthy people out there who are evading their taxes, and we need a lot more IRS people looking into that to make sure that they aren't evading it. So he wanted to hire thousands and thousands of people. I think that has been pulled out, but I don't know that it has been pulled out. And it may, because this is still a framework, it may get slipped back in.
Let me just mention real quickly before we get into another topic that one that you might want to act on is we have a take action item, which gives you an opportunity to actually contact a member of the House of Representatives. I suspect many of you have already done so, but I wanted to mention that again because we give you all sorts of reasons why this is a bad idea from a financial point of view. But even if they cut it in half and cut it in third and all the rest, we also mention all the toxic ideas that are in this piece of legislation. And so I think it is really important for you to, if you haven't done so, visit the website, pointofview.net. Take action. All you have to do is know your zip code. That would be nice if you knew your member of Congress, but if you know your zip code, we'll get you there. And then we give you a suggested letter. You can modify it any way you want. Hit submit, and then you can contact your member of Congress.
And, back to the unserious nature of this, why are we in such a rush to get this done? Joe mentioned it was because Joe Biden was leaving the country, and he wanted to be able to say, I have a win. And he's going to be gone for a week doing something. Well, he may come back a little bit, but he's going to go. He went to see the Vatican, went to see the Pope, going to the G20 summit. Then he's going to go to the COP26, the Conference of Climate of Parties. That's what it's called, for the 26th annual. So he can make a speech, and then he'll come back. But he wanted to be able to have a win to go tell all his fellow leaders of other countries, I have a win. He wants to pass a $1.75 trillion legislation so he can tell other countries that he has a win.
That's terrible. By the way, if you want to know about the climate summit, that's one of the other articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews we've posted. And let me take a phone call because my commentary today is, of course, about China. And since one of our callers wants to talk about China, we'll mention that one very quickly and move on to some others. But Brick in Georgia, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yes, Kirby. I appreciate you taking the call. I spoke with you the other day about China's aggression against Taiwan. And I know you mentioned that that Joe Biden, or you wasn't sure, what response he would make if China moved against Taiwan, invade Taiwan and take over. And to me, we got if we don't stop, if China moves against Taiwan, tries to annex Taiwan, take it over, China was not going to stop at Taiwan.
Nope.
We got bases all over the Pacific. The next step could be the move against Hawaii.
Yeah, maybe not that one, but certainly there's something that's going to happen. In 1979, we passed what's called the Taiwan Relations Act, and it says that, again, we would defend Taiwan. But let's go around the table. Debbie, what's your thoughts if indeed China did move against Taiwan? I don't think they'll do it till after the Olympics. They don't want to get the bad press. but okay, a year from now, that happens. What about that? Do you really have confidence that Joe Biden will step forward and actually try to meet that aggression from China?
No, I do not. And part of the problem, the issue, even during the campaign, people are aware of it. Joe Biden has a long-standing, I don't even know, incestuous, what word to use, but between Hunter Biden, his son, Joe Biden, and China, millions flowing. Many people use the expression about Joe Biden, he is beholden to China. So I don't think he will stand up to them. I think even, we're not going to go off in Afghanistan today, but he's really emboldened and enabled China on the Afghanistan front by just abandoning our role there. So I think it's a very legitimate concern for America that no matter what China does, Joe Biden's going to find a reason that we can't respond.
And China is expanding by building in the South China Sea,
there they are,
making islands and then calling this our land and then expanding their territory by doing that.
I might just mention we will cover China a little bit more next week, but our October issue on Outlook deals with China, deals with Taiwan, deals with Hong Kong and some of those issues. And we kind of show you a map of what China would like and actually some of the islands that China sort of created already or actually claim already. So again, it doesn't take much imagination to believe that China would move further. Whether they end up in Hawaii, I don't know, but we saw that once before with Japan. So China's not something we'll talk a lot about today, but of course we've had Gordon Chang on here, we've had Gary Bauer, we've had a number of others. But when we come back from the break, just real quickly, before we get into another topic, we have Jonathan Saenz with us. There is a constitutional amendment in the state of Texas on the issue of religious liberty. And I know some of you are not in the state of Texas. Matter of fact, most of our listeners aren't. But I think you'll be encouraged to find out what one state is doing and actually what you might want to do in your own state in terms of religious liberty. We almost always talk about that on our Friday weekend edition with Kelly Shackelford or Jeremy Dice or Lathan Watts. And so I thought it'd be good to hear that real quickly before we move on to some other topics. So let's take a break, talk a little bit about our constitutional amendment dealing with religious liberty in the state of Texas right after this.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and we'll take some more phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. But I might mention in the studio, of course, we have Dr. Merrill Matthews and Debbie Georgatos. But joining us now is another lawyer, Jonathan Saenz, who is the president of Texas Values. Before that, actually worked with Liberty Institute. And I recognize that we're going to be talking for just a minute about a particular opportunity for people to vote next Tuesday on a constitutional amendment on religious liberty. Though that only affects those of you listening in the state of Texas. The reality is, I think this could be a model for what you could do in your own state. So, Jonathan, tell us about this. I've already voted, but for a lot of people that are in Texas, they have a chance on Proposition 3 to vote for a constitutional amendment to protect churches and religious liberty. Tell us more.
Well, it's good to be with you, Kerby. And they don't have to wait until next Tuesday. There's early voting on this matter right now. Most of the polls are open until 7 here on Friday, and then you'll have to wait again after that until Tuesday. But look, we all remember what happened last year. You had government officials across the country and some local government officials in the state of Texas that were putting pressure on churches to close during the COVID pandemic. Some of that didn't stop for a while. And it was necessary that we pass a state law to make sure that that would never happen again. But we also passed a constitutional amendment that gives voters, every registered voter in the state of Texas, the ability to go to the ballot box and to have specific language in our Constitution that makes it clear that a government official at any level can never order a church to close or force a religious organization to close. And we're talking about the four walls of the church, Kerby. We're not talking about in some public arena or some political issue. And that's what happened a year ago. You had some government officials reach into the four walls of the church effectively and order them to close. And a lot of churches were concerned. They didn't want to end up in a lawsuit or, some other situation where they'd fined or they might end up in jail. And so the way to make that clear is to vote for Proposition 3 on the statewide constitutional ballot. Every registered voter in the state of Texas can have a role and can go vote on this issue.
Debbie, I was just thinking about the fact that we have listeners in Nevada, and they pointed out that they said, well, the casinos could be open, but the churches couldn't be open. So one of the churches rented a casino and did a church service. And you had in California, because we have lots of listeners in California, that said, well, the marijuana shops could be open, but the churches couldn't be open, right?
Absolutely. And the standard was supposedly what's essential. And so essential services appear to be casinos, abortion clinics.
Liquor stores?
Yeah, liquor stores. These are
stores.
essential. But church is the most fundamental of First Amendment idea that we have freedom of religion and freedom of worship in this country. That wasn't essential. This is a really great, Jonathan, I'm glad you're pushing this. It's a really great thing Texas is doing.
Well, look, and I appreciate that support, too. I mean, this was authored by Jeff Leach in the House and Senator Kelly Hancock in the Senate, and it was a bipartisan issue. In order for there to be a ballot initiative, this is not an opinion poll. This is not finding out what your party thinks about this issue. This is deciding if we're going to have language in the state constitution that makes it clear and specific, and obviously we need it. This is Proposition 3. Otherwise, if we didn't need it, you wouldn't have government officials doing what they did last year, local government officials in the state of Texas and governors in other states and so on. And Proposition 3, again, early voting continues today. Main election day is November 2nd. We've got information on this at txvalues.org. You can go to our website. But we all remember it happening. And I was there at the legislature. I said it was bipartisan. You had Republicans and Democrats agree. Yeah, you know what? We shouldn't be doing these things. We shouldn't allow government officials to do some of those things. Let's eliminate any doubt. Let's eliminate any gray area, if you will. And to your point, Kerby, listeners in other parts of the country, if Texas does this, and we'll find out the results at the end of the evening on November 2nd on Tuesday when the polls close, this could be something other states could say, you know what, that's a good idea. Let's not forget about the power of this moment, right? And the value of having it in the state constitution, it's a higher threshold. So if someone in the future, some other government official or collection of them wanted to change it, they would have to get 2/3 in the House, 2/3 in the Senate, and they'd have to go to the ballot box to change that. We have a really important and a timely opportunity as Texas voters and as Christians to get it right on Proposition 3.
So, Jonathan, just mentioned the process here. Does it if it gets a majority of votes, is it in law? Does the governor have to sign off on it? What's the process after the vote?
Once the vote is certified, you just need a simple majority. Okay, so in order for it to be on the ballot, you needed a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate, and yes, for the governor to sign it. That's already happened. Now all we need is a simple majority at the ballot. All registered voters, Proposition 3, vote in favor of it so we can keep churches open. And look, let's not even allow it to be closed. Maybe you think, oh, it's Texas, we'll probably be fine. I would take nothing for granted. I think there's at least an article or two out there, the ACLU and some publications are suggesting to vote against it. Let's make it clear. Let's not get 51%. Let's get 60, 70, 80%. Let's leave no doubt that churches are essential and you don't mess with them in the state of Texas.
Let me also mention, for those of you that are not in the state of Texas right now, get something to write with and write in txvalues.org. Of course, we have it on our website. First piece there is Texas Prop 3, Churches Are Essential. Now, it gives you some information. It also has a nice video with Jonathan and all the arguments, and you can actually download that. And that's something I'm going to give you as an assignment, because if you think this is a good idea and you are in a different state, you could take this material and pass it on to your legislator and see if they would want to do the same thing. And of course, we'll let you know after Tuesday night, probably Wednesday morning, exactly what took place and then what takes place after that. But we think churches are essential. Jonathan, I think you've done a very good job of that. And if people want to contact you, they can also go to txvalues.org, can't they?
No, that's absolutely right, Kirby. And look, our nonprofit work is statewide. We focus on the state of Texas, but we know, like the Texas Heartbeat Law and other matters, what happens in Texas can impact the rest of the country. And so I think, for listeners in other parts of the country, if they want to learn more about how to do this in their state, they can contact us. But if they have a friend or a family member, maybe and they're not aware of it in the state of Texas, let them know that the main election day is November 2nd. Early voting continues until 7 p.m. in the state of Texas. And they can find out some more details about Proposition 3 and protecting religious freedom at txvalues.org.
We also have a link there as well, and then information about that video that you can watch. So, Jonathan, thank you for joining us, and let's encourage as many people as possible to actually go out and vote. And we're going to be watching a few other elections this Tuesday. I want to go around the round table. The state of Virginia.
State of Virginia.
Okay, why don't you help us out here, Dr. Merrill Matthews?
Well,
I know that Debbie has some comments, too.
Virginia used to be a red state. It has increasingly become blue, and it's become a pretty solid blue state as people, I've argued as people in Washington, D.C. and Maryland were moving to Northern Virginia to try to escape the taxes and then vote for all those things still when they get there.
I know.
But it has been an easy task for most Democratic gubernatorial candidates to run and win. And now Terry McAuliffe, who's already been governor, is back again because you can't do consecutive sessions there in Virginia. And some of the polls have him tied with Youngkin, and some of them have Youngkin ahead by a little bit now.
Oh, it's a very exciting race to watch in Virginia because this has been in Loudoun County, Virginia, one of the main focuses of the movement of parents showing up at school board meetings, parents saying we don't want to have this transgender policy where anatomical boys can be in the girls' room. We don't like critical race theory. We want you to stop teaching our kids to hate each other. It has become among the national focuses on these parents' activity at school boards. And then in a debate between the two gubernatorial candidates, you actually had the Democrat, Terry McAuliffe, say something to the effect, I don't think that parents should have a say in what the schools teach. And in this era, when you're watching critical race theory, the anti-Americanism being taught, I mean, you might be a Democrat voter because you like unions or something, but you hit that button with parents and you diminish the value of parents, that is not going to play well.
I think so. And that was a campaign ad that wrote itself, isn't it, pretty much in that regard? One of the articles we've posted today, we may or may not get to it, Revenge of the Parents, but the piece there by Philip Klein, Democrats are playing with fire by underestimating the power of parents who are fired up and ready to assert control over their kids' education. And I've said before, as we come to a break here, that, up until the pandemic, most people probably could not tell you the name of their county judge. But I suspect that most of them during the lockdown knew the name of their county judge. And up until recently, I would suspect, especially people even in Loudoun County, couldn't tell you the name of their school board members. They know who they are now. And so this next couple of elections, of course, this one's sort of an off-year election, but next year, 2022, I should say, is going to be very significant because I think more and more Americans who before were sort of apathetic about politics, recognizing that some of these people really do control your life.
The school boards are just a great example. The attitude that is underlying something like McAuliffe said and the way the school boards acted is we are the supreme rulers. We decide what kids learn. And you parents are kind of peasants getting in our way. And I just think that there's a mom movement, there's dads too, but just saying, no, actually, we are the primary we impart values. We teach our children. We teach them what's right. The school, please stick to math and science and, chemistry.
I think so. Let's take a break. When we come back, of course, I think everybody wants to talk about immigration. I think it's about time. And we're going to pay reparations. We'll talk about that right after this.
With a climate change confab taking place in Glasgow, Scotland, I thought I'd share the response of a woman in perhaps her 60s or 70s to a young grocery clerk who suggested that next time she bring her own reusable grocery bag because, quote, plastic bags are not good for the environment. When the woman apologized, the clerk pointed out that your generation did not care enough to save our environment for future generations. Well, green has become a thing since that lady's childhood. But she listed for the clerk some green things we all used to do to save money and avoid waste. Back then, she said, we returned milk bottles, soda bottles, and beer bottles to the store. The store sent them back to the plant to be washed and sterilized and refilled so it could use the same bottles over and over. So they really were recycled. She explained that people reused brown paper grocery bags, not only for garbage, but to cover our school books. Back then, the lady said, we washed the baby's diapers because we didn't have the throwaway kind. We dried clothes on a line. Wind and solar power really did dry our clothes back in our early days. And, she remembered, people had only one TV in the house, not one in every room. Back then, she said, we didn't fire up an engine and burn gasoline just to cut the lawn. We used a push mower that ran on human power. In fact, she said, we exercised by working, so we didn't need to go to a health club to run on treadmills that operate on electricity. People walked to the grocery store if it was close. Kids walked or rode their bikes to school and to activities, instead of turning their mom into a 24-hour taxi service. Oh, but the climate elites in Glasgow have more grandiose and expensive plans in mind for saving the planet. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and we're going to get into some other issues in the next hour, but I thought we would just briefly talk about immigration because this is an issue that has sort of surfaced in the last 24 hours, and it has to do with the fact that if you watched Tucker Carlson last night or some other shows, they all say whenever we come into the studio and we begin to get ready for the next program, we hear something from the Biden administration, and some people look around going, no, that can't be true. That's got to be The Onion. That's got to be Babylon Bee. There's just no way. And there's sometimes when Kelly Shackelford walks in here with something, and I'm thinking, are you sure you're not making this up and just trying to actually have some fun with me? But Dr. Merrill Matthews, of course, what they're talking about is the fact that at a time when we may have as many as 2 million people cross the southern border, then there is also the question about people that have been deported. And the argument is, well, then we need to pay reparations to people who came here illegally and were deported.
As I understand it, they're looking at families that were separated. And of course, one of the issues is, was it really a family? Because we don't know. But families that were separated, and maybe one of the parents was deported. And so the charge out of the Wall Street Journal, Tucker was getting this out of the Wall Street Journal, was that they're looking at $450,000 per person.
Yes,
that this happened to with a a budget of something like $1 billion in order to do this. And interestingly, Tucker Carlson went on to talk about, these people here, sometimes they commit felonies. Sometimes he had a situation in which there was a drunk driver, an illegal immigrant who was here, a drunk driver, and killed somebody. And under Joe Biden, that's not a felony. And he had a quote from Joe showing Joe saying, I don't even think drunk driving should be a felony here. But it's a felony for everybody who's here legally. It's just not a felony, apparently. I agree with Tucker. You sit back to this, and he had a quote from the Babylon Bee saying, we actually, we make things up here for, sort of satire and ridicule and so forth. But some of these things are more than we could actually think up.
And again, there's some reasons for that. So Debbie, help us out here. Why was this even being proposed? This seems like such a wrong-headed idea, but it's to stem the possibility that there could be even larger awards that might be given, right?
Right. Actually, it is preposterous, and I would love to see the U.S. government just say no to all of it, not paying you a penny ever. All of the people who are involved here, they are, as Dr. Matthews was saying, they're people who've crossed the border, and during the Trump administration, they were separated, not to be mean, but because there were also children being trafficked, sex trafficked, kidnapped, used as an excuse to have so they had kids separated from parents. What's occurred is that there are now numerous pieces of pending litigation, ACLU taking some of the cases, saying the separation imposed by the Trump administration caused, emotional harm, long-term, they're going to need counseling for years, it caused trauma, blah, blah, blah. So they're suing the U.S. government because of the policy of separating parents and kids. And one of the arguments you're hearing from some of these lawyers is, look, if we don't settle with these people, they might go to court and they might get some jury verdict to be, far bigger. So we're trying to just create a settlement. I should note, though, in many of the cases, the ACLU is even saying part of the settlement, because they're representing the families, part of the settlement isn't just reparations for your emotional harm. It is also guaranteed permanent status to be here and some cases permanent path to citizenship. It is the most egregious, outrageous, preposterous. It is these people broke in the country. And it's like someone broke in your house and they happen to step on something sharp on the floor and cut their foot and they sue you. They had no right to be in your house. These people had no right to be in America. And the answer should be a firm, solid no.
And economic incentives matter. Incentives matter. We've got another wave of thousands of people who are moving up this direction.
Yeah.
And if you look at this and say, well, you mean if we come in and we have a child with them and they somehow separate us, we might be able to get $450,000? Sounds like a winner to me. And I just the inability of the Biden administration or some of these attorneys to understand what happens when you set some of these policies in place is unbelievable.
I also think there's just they're relishing this further criticism of the Trump administration. If Trump hadn't been so evil, none of this would have happened. But the other aspect of all this is if there were to be, if the answer, which should be from our government, is no, we're not paying you anything, and just denial of it, even if you had litigation and you had a preposterous jury award given to these people, I think it would be a great service to America to recognize how lunatic the American left is, that we're going to pay people and we're going to let a jury say, yes, they get whatever number they said, $10 billion a family, whatever the number they said. This would help people recognize how crazed the American left is. And if you got all the way to the Supreme Court and they said, yes, absolutely, this is wonderful, $10 billion to every individual who has got their feelings hurt because they broke into America and someone separated them, I actually think it'd be a great testing ground ultimately for the executive branch to say, not paying, because this money does not grow on trees, contrary to what AOC seemed to think. This is taxpayer dollars going to pay people who broke into America. It's just wrong.
You don't know what to say after a while.
You don't know what to say anymore. And my guess is Democratic campaign advisors are contacting the White House saying, change this immediately. We're already likely to face a red wave come next year. If this goes through, we're going to see the Democratic majorities in the House and Senate just wiped out.
I would think so. And again, a lot of people do suspect that about 18 months from now, Kevin McCarthy is going to be running the House and not Nancy Pelosi. But just before we take a break, first of all, I want to encourage you, if we haven't given you enough reason to contact your member of Congress, that is something that's available. But I want to go around the round table, and of course, we'll do this at the end of the next hour. But at IPI.org, you have Kim Strassel coming. Talking about the threat to free speech. I think of her all the time when I drive each year on the Sunset Highway to Oregon, because I go right by the town she was born in, Buxton, Oregon, which is a little footnote in history, but she is a very gifted writer for the Wall Street Journal.
She's
right?
very good. She does the Friday column called Potomac Watch that she took over from Paul Gigot in 2005, I believe. And when she took over that, I thought, well, we'll just see how, because Paul Gigot was so good.
He was
Kim
very
Strassel
good.
is one of the few must-read people in the country. You need to stay on top with what Kim Strassel is doing, and we've got her coming to Dallas in November 16th here in Dallas. And so if people are in the general area, you want to make a little drive, come on and join us. We'll have information on the website at IPI.org.
Wish you would do that more on the Zoom, because that was an opportunity for those of us that couldn't make it, because I'm actually busy that hour, but also people the rest of the country, but they could find out more about
and
some
we did
of the
a
things.
Zoom with her back in the summer.
Yeah,
Is
so
this
again,
a luncheon?
Yes, it's a luncheon.
So I would certainly recommend that. Of course, we got also a few other people we'll talk about in the next hour. But when people go to your website, first of all, what is available there right now?
The website is americacanwetalk.org, and that is the name of my talk show. I do 4 days a week, which is why I'm not here as often as I used to be.
I know.
But it's Monday through Thursday at 3 p.m., and we capture every show. The shows go out live on my website. We capture every show. You can see old shows. You can see past interviews, see upcoming interviews. We have Sidney Powell coming up on Wednesday. She'll be in studio. We interview thought leaders and thinkers. We have a blog. And we also have, at the close of every show, I do a little segment called Why It Matters to You. I try to say, it's not just that this is an interesting issue, it actually matters to you. Very popular feature on our website. So americacanwetalk.org.
Again, we have a link to Facebook, iTunes, Spotify. She's in all those different ways. And so again, as we've also put some of your faces up here, we've got some of the links that you have. And so you can find out more from certainly IPI.org and Dr. Merrill Matthews. We've got the Facebook and Twitter feed. And of course, we have a link to americacanwetalk.org. And if you can't remember all of that, it's on the website. We come back, though, I want to talk about the economy. After all, GDP slowed, and then if we're going to have strikes, and then we're going to fire everybody on December 8th, what's that going to mean? So we'll talk about that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to spend some time talking about the economy because, as we've pointed out, there are so many things happen in the economy that affect you and your family, your jobs, the prices, inflation. But I thought I'd at least start out by recognizing that the third quarter of the GDP, the annual growth rate, is at 2%. Now, you would want it to be at least 3%, and it wasn't even close in that regard. But I do want to kind of look ahead and say what will be happening in the fourth quarter, because that's where we are right now. We have, first of all, a whole set of issues with supply chain, of which many people are very concerned, especially when they're starting to say it isn't just that we have container ships off of the shore there of Los Angeles and Long Beach. It's even if you could unload those, we don't have enough trucks to get them out, and all sorts of other issues. It's almost a butterfly effect at each particular area. If it causes one problem, it's like a row of dominoes, if I could mix my metaphors. So that's an issue. Then you have some other things going on as well. Yesterday, we talked about the possible strikes at Kellogg's and John Deere. And then there's another looming deadline, which I mentioned in the last minute there before we finished the first hour. And that deadline is December 8th, which brings us to our second article, the bill to combat the jab or job ultimatum. In other words, if you are not vaccinated, then you will lose your job. And let me come to you, first of all, Debbie, because I've seen all sorts of people in the streets, even in New York City, with signs protesting this and calling for the president to call off the federal government in that regard.
Absolutely. There was a very large march in New York City. It was actually the public employees, firefighters, police, emergency workers who will lose their jobs. Some of the points they were making is, look, many of us have been interacting with the public during this whole COVID. Many of us have had COVID. We have natural immunity. And they really are protesting the idea that the government can decide you lose your job if you don't take the jab. So they actually had signs using the word communism, which I understand if you throw around the words Marxism, communism, too freely, then they lose their meaning. But the concept of why is the government have the power to tell us to do this? The other thing is pending is the Republicans in Congress are trying to put together a bill, essentially arguing that at least for so the essential workers, you're back to that, should not be subject to Biden's policy of jab or job. I wish they would just say no one should be subject to it. We don't do that in America. But there is more rising up and people actually being willing to quit their jobs if the other choice is to have to take the jab if they're against it.
Well, and you and I have talked about this before. Generally speaking, we have states and the federal government have given employers pretty wide latitude to be able to require their employees to do certain things. So it was not a surprise at all to me that some employers might step up and say, we need to have our employees vaccinated, especially if you're interacting with the public. But if you're working at home or something like that, no reason for that. Biden steps in on this now, and he requires all federal employees to do it. Does he have the right to do that? I'm going to guess he probably does, but then he expands that to contractors, and then that's the issue because they're not working for the federal government. They're just getting paid by the federal government. And then you've got some states now, they're stepping up saying we're not going to require it. We're not allow anybody to require that, any employer or anything. And it's just become so politicized that it's hard to know what's going to happen. I suspect it ends up in the Supreme Court at some point in some way, and we'll see what the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court has years ago allowed states to require vaccinations for people going to school. Sure. And so public school and I think even private school. So there's sort of a minor precedent for children who are going to public school, but does that expand to other things? And I have no idea where this goes.
Expanding to adults seems, and that this is a precedent for
that. That's a much bigger issue if you start expanding to adults, because children, they oftentimes they can't make decisions. They're not considered, of course, legal age. So it'll be very interesting to see where this ends up going.
What I am so struck by is how, whether you have doctors or nurses or other people in healthcare professions or frontline types of individuals saying, look, I have no problem with vaccinations for mumps and measles and this, but I do for this one. And I think the assumption was made early on, Debbie, is that what would happen is once we have the arm of the government coming down, everybody go, okay, I guess I will. And it has been striking to me how many individuals in so many different fields are saying, I know we got a crime problem, but I'm not going to get it, and I'm going to walk off as a police officer. And I know we got a health problem, but I don't care. I'm going to walk off as a nurse. A lot of people are willing to suffer rather significantly in this regard.
They are, and I think it's people who are reading more and more about what is in these vaccines and how they're not really actually vaccines in the traditional sense of the word. There's a great organization, America's Frontline Doctors. I mean, they're in the thousands of doctors now saying the vaccines, these are not normal vaccines. It is not true of Johnson & Johnson, but the other two, Moderna and Pfizer, they have mRNA. The point of them is they alter your RNA, and the content of the vaccines is causing great alarm. And then people actually reading the government's own data, CDC's data under VAERS, telling Americans how many people have died directly as the vaccine killed them. The vaccine caused their death. There are over 17,000 now. And just think about this. Back when we had swine flu or one of those kind of early on flus and they had a vaccine, they had 32 people die and they pulled the vaccine off the market. We're at 17,000, and that is a low number because many doctors are saying they don't report, and I don't know for sure, so I won't report. And that's just deaths. And then on top of that, you have people who suffered severe disability, severe health problems. And I think the informed Americans are saying, look, this is not a normal vaccine. This is a disease for healthy people that's 99% going to survive. Why do I have to put this experimental vaccine that's causing so much death in my system when it's something I can overcome with normal medications? I mean, it's the informed people. In fact, there was a study showed that the unvaccinated are among the most highly educated Americans.
Well, I'll jump in here because the CDC does track the people who've claimed to have died from the vaccine, but they have a disclaimer on there. Anybody, medical professionals, pharmaceutical companies, or people who have an idea can send in those reports. Right. So the CDC and the FDA say you cannot trust these reports because they haven't been vetted for accuracy. So it would not surprise me if some people have died from the vaccine, but you can't trust that. And they'll specifically say you can't trust it because we don't have no idea who's sending these in or whether or not they're accurate.
And that's the VAERS system, right? That they're talking about? Yeah. Well, again, I'm just struck by that, if nothing else, that a lot of people you would not have think would ever have stepped away. And I think that was the Carnegie Mellon study that found that the one demographic group that had the highest percentage of people weren't vaccinated were PhDs. So, and these are doctors and all sorts of other individuals. But I want to come back after the break. And what does this mean? I mean, if you all of a sudden have more and more people walking off the job, we have, 11 million jobs that are available but aren't being filled. What does that look like in terms of the economy? And just to be helpful to our listeners, if indeed the supply chain is going to be that bad, maybe you need to buy an extra can of goods or something, stick it on the shelf. So let's talk about what that means right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The latest news out of China has been a cause for concern and perhaps a wake-up call to consider what the communist leaders are planning. China tested a hypersonic, nuclear-capable missile. Hypersonic vehicles travel at Mach 5 or faster. They're not defensive weapons and fly in the low atmosphere, enabling them to evade defense systems. One source said, "We have no idea how they did this." One report said that the test revealed that China was far more advanced than U.S. officials realized. The test raised new questions about why the U.S. often underestimated China's military modernization. Yes, that's a good question. This country has more than a dozen intelligence agencies. They all seem surprised by the latest revelation. That raises the question of why we're spending so much money on agencies that were surprised by the collapse of Afghanistan and surprised by the military advances in China. Hypersonic missiles are uniquely suited to defeat our missile defense systems. We can't counter them, especially since we would have enough problem even tracking them. An MIT professor hastened to add that just because China tested this missile capability doesn't mean they plan to deploy it, but I would recommend that professor stick to science and technology, because the history of communist governments is that they will likely use advanced weaponry either directly on countries or as a means of intimidating other governments. By the way, this latest news follows the discovery of hundreds of new missile silos in the Chinese desert, likely dug for nuclear missiles. This isn't the behavior of a country merely trying to improve its defensive capabilities against other nations. Each of these disturbing revelations should be a wake-up call to our leaders. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, I want to talk about the economy, and if nothing else, just a warning. Sometimes people say, well, you're talking about some things that are concerning, but again, if we do run into supply chain issues, that's going to be something to pay attention to. And some people say, maybe I need to buy my Christmas presents right now and all the rest. But you might remember that we talked about the piece by Stephen Moore, Will All of America Go on Strike? And so at a time when we already are starting to see occasionally people going into grocery stores, big box stores, hardware stores, and showing some empty shelves. I don't know if that gets better or worse, but I'm thinking it gets worse. And then when you start seeing that Kellogg's and John Deere are talking about strikes, and for those of us that are a little bit older around the table, you look at the last time you had some of those strikes, and those go back in one case to 1972, another one in 1980. I have listeners that weren't born during that period of time, and those of us that are a little bit older around the table remember a time in the 1970s when you had high inflation and high prices, and you talk about stagflation, and the young people look at you like you're just made a word up. But those are some experiences that we might be going through. Is that fair?
Well, I remember somebody in, around 1976 or 7, he was so excited because he just bought a home and got a 15% loan and thought he had done a good job by getting a 15% interest rate.
Yes. And my first house was 5%. And when I tell people now, they say, oh, that's too bad. I said, no, you don't understand. It was
that
about
was good.
Yeah, it was about 10% back then. This guy was willing to fund it for a lot less. And Debbie, that's the issue. You know, you're a mom, and you look at what food's on the shelves. And of course, your kids are older now, but I mean, you start paying attention to, my goodness, we just might not be able to have all sorts of things that we expect in terms of food. And then the other day when they're talking to Jen Psaki and they're talking about some of these what are called consumer durables, whether it's a washing machine or refrigerator, unfortunately, he made the mistake of also saying treadmill. He says, well, I'm so sorry that you wouldn't get your treadmill on time. But if you think about this, I know people, including myself, a year ago, where our refrigerator goes down and we couldn't find a refrigerator. I mean, you just begin to realize how dire this could become and make us feel a little bit like a third world country all of a sudden.
Oh, it sure does. And actually, that old adage in politics, how, a lot of people can't be persuaded until the issue comes to their front door or hits their wallet. And then they all say, wait, I think I do care about economic policy. I think I do care about politics. So, yeah, I think if we really face the shortages that they are anticipating, there will be a lot of finger pointing politically. I know a lot of people are trying to, in fact, I'm pretty sure social media, if you try to claim that any of Biden's policies have anything to do with the price of gas, that gets taken down. Can't say that. And I'm not claiming you can make a causal connection A to B, but it is going to cause people to start to pay attention to, and actually whether they could put their finger on why. They look at the economy under President Trump. They look at jobs growing. They look at this wonderful economy and jobs coming back to America. And they look at now, and they don't have to get a PhD in economics to recognize I like Trump's policies better. So I think that if the economy gets as bad as they're talking about in this stagflation and inflation, I think you're going to see people, inevitably going to blame the current administration and their policies.
I was just thinking, Dr. Merrill Matthews, that for years we had you talk about healthcare policy, and I sometimes got the feeling that people's eyes glazed over and they yawned. And then we had the Affordable Care Act, and all of a sudden, everybody was really interested in healthcare policy. Same thing, you can talk about supply chain, and everybody goes, I don't even care. That's just something that is so hypothetical or abstract. All of a sudden, you go to a grocery store, and something you wanted to buy isn't there. People start paying attention.
And the strikes you mentioned, I listened to somebody, a union person, talking about Striketober, and how that is something that they want to make sure that workers who are part of unions get out and start striking, because going back to Rahm Emanuel, I believe it was, never let a crisis go to waste. And if you have employers who are struggling getting people to work, and if we go on strike, then maybe we have a little more edge to force that employer to bump up salaries even more and do other things. And of course, this ripples through the economy and actually adds to the inflation that's already going on. So it's not clear how all this gets resolved. If they're trying in several ways, Joe Biden made an announcement about, we've come with an agreement with the Longshoremen's Union. They're going to stay open 24 hours. And I was saying, why weren't they already staying 24 hours? If you're that backlogged, why weren't you already doing that? And my understanding is it was only meant to be for one port, not everything. And I'm not sure that I see a whole lot of difference changing right now. But you've got a market out there for people who are employers who need workers, and they can't seem to get them.
And if you continue to have the policies the Biden administration talking about sending money to people separate from the illegal immigrants we talked about a minute ago, there was another floating policy about the idea written into the Build Back Better, which was essentially, just give every single parent $31,000 a year. It was, because they got used to the COVID money. Now they don't have the COVID money. And so the other incentive economically is these companies have their employees go on strike. And then they would say, we'll hire new people, except they can't if their people are unincentivized to work or disincentivized from working.
So we're getting a situation where you get a lot of salary increases, and that works out well for some people, but it's creating this supply chain problem that we just don't know how this thing is going to play out.
Let's talk energy for just a minute, and that's also a Dr. Merrill Matthews piece on the real reason Biden is going to the COP26 climate summit. And before we get to the summit itself, isn't it at least fair to say, even though sometimes if you make this statement on Twitter, it'll be taken down, that if you've been pursuing green energy, which is a very significant part of this Build Back Better idea, and you want to no longer have the Keystone XL pipeline and a variety variety of other
Right.
pipelines and things like that, that it's almost inevitable that we wouldn't be producing enough energy, and then all of a sudden now we're asking OPEC to provide energy that we could have provided for ourselves. Is that fair?
That's fair. And the Keystone XL pipeline was a supply chain issue.
Yes, it was.
It's how you get oil from one place to another place.
And when you don't have it going any further.
When you don't have it,
Yeah.
then they have to use trains, and that creates other backlogs. And there was an issue 3 or 4 years ago where we were having a big backlog of trains because they were carrying energy, oil to various places, and they couldn't carry other things. So this is all supply chain related. And then, of course, you've got Putin and President Xi are not attending some of these things that they're wanting to, that Joe Biden wanted to have a chance to meet with. But I heard that Putin from the Soviet Union has said we're now able to start filling up our tankers, because about 40% of Europe's energy, natural gas, comes from Russia. And Germany is trying to expand that with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. President Trump tried to change Germany's mind. That didn't work. But Putin uses this stuff in the winter as political tools to say, we want you to go along. Don't criticize us. Otherwise, we'll have, the pipeline had a problem again. We'll have to get that fixed. It'll be a code for a little while.
And I've been in Hungary when somebody said, it's awful cold here. I said, Putin hasn't turned on the power yet.
Yes.
And that's pretty amazing. And on the environmental issues, your article, which we've posted, people can read. But also, I might commend them to go back and find one of the very good interviews you did with Michael Schellenberger, because here is an individual very much dedicated to environmental issues, but at the same time finally said, I've had enough of this kind of apocalyptic type of environmental scare tactics, right? Isn't that fair?
That's right. And he wrote a book about this, and we've had him on Point of View. IPI did a Zoom call with him, and it's one of the hardcore environmentalists who ended up saying, we're doing a lot of things. They're exaggerating some of the things, and we need to take steps which end up allowing us to try to get a cleaner economy, but something that's reasonable by transitioning to more natural gas, maybe to nuclear. Both of those are not acceptable to the environmental movement anymore, even though they used to be to some extent. So he's a very rational person trying to make sense of how you get a cleaner economy that's realistic.
I might just mention another one would be Dr. Stephen Koonin. I have his book, Unsettled. And in case you're not familiar with that name, here's an individual that was actually in the Obama cabinet and yet nevertheless basically unsettled what climate science tells us, what it doesn't, and why it matters, because he is spending a fair amount of time also, even though he might be inclined to believe that, sure, the Earth is warming a little bit, but this apocalyptic, we're all going to die in 12 years, AOC stuff is certainly something that you'll be hearing at the climate summit, and certainly Biden will be giving that speech. But I think some people with a little more common sense are starting to say, no, I don't think so.
I've had that Michael Schellenberger on my show too, and I think people like that are so effective because they really are committed. They're not just cavalier, they are knowledgeable, and they are just not going to go along with this apocalyptic, we're all going to die, what they've been saying in 12 years, which they've been saying for whatever it is, 20 or more years. And I think that's part of what's happening in this whole climate thing is more countries are realizing, wait a minute, we're all getting hyped into doing things will actually hurt our people, and they don't want to humor it.
Bjorn Lomborg is another one, the skeptical environmentalist. There are a lot of people out there actually speaking some common sense into this issue. Let's take a break, though. We have some more to talk about. We'll do that right after this.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Haven't done very good at reminding you that we will take some phone calls, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. We, of course, have covered quite a bit, and we always have more to put on the table, but I'd love to get your thoughts. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Third article is Revenge of the Parents. I did mention that, and the reason I mentioned it is, first of all, you might, and I want to go around the round table and see what everybody thinks, might get a little bit of a preview of coming attractions because, as we have pointed out before, Loudoun County sometimes almost is ground zero on this whole issue of what is happening in the school boards. And that is, of course, just one county in Virginia. But when you look at, of course, Terry McAuliffe running and running scared by bringing just everybody that he could possibly imagine into the Commonwealth of Virginia to try to win an election that you would think should win going away. I think, didn't Joe Biden win Virginia by 10 points? And haven't most of the Democrats that have actually run either as governor or then, of course, presidential candidates before that, even Hillary Clinton won by at least 10 points. It's not really a purple state, Dr. Merle Matthews. It's pretty blue, isn't it now?
It is blue now.
Yes.
And the interesting thing there is also saying they need to pass Joe Biden's Build Back Better to help Terry McAuliffe out there win so that they can have a win. In fact, there are several Democrats who are saying we have got to get this passed or else we'll be hurt in the 2022 elections. And I think it's actually just the opposite.
I think so too.
If they pass this, they're liable to be hurt in the 2022 elections. But it's a just completely different mindset.
Go ahead.
It's also within the Democrat Party, they have a huge split, and this is what Biden's having to deal with because he's got the socialist faction, which is not just AOC and her little group, but it's bigger than that. It's the Bernie Sanders faction, and they want to they're disappointed they're not talking their $6 trillion deal. And he's got, thank God, we have Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema kind of being the roadblock there, and they're worlds apart. And so he's trying to get down to, recently the Build Back Better thing said, okay, we're going to take out the paid parental leave part, which to many socialists is something that must pass. So they've got to struggle on the left. And I don't, to the extent Biden has any real leadership, I don't know where he really stands. He wants something to get checkmarked by my name. Look what I got. I got this passed. And he's got it. They're in a world of hurt because I think actually what the left is trying to do through this bill, most Americans, in fact, even a significant chunk of Democrats don't want. And they can't figure out what legacy to give Joe because what they want to do, which is not fly in America.
One of the things here that's been brought up is just, again, how that school board issue. Who would have thought that a battle of a school board would affect a governor's race? But I think a lot of it is that people on the left don't understand the visceral reaction to things like critical race theory, the reaction to the idea of transgenderism, and then the more recent story of a boy that actually puts on a dress, goes into the girls' restroom, and engages in activities we won't talk about on a family-friendly program, and then you have the school board denying it and then finding out, no, I guess it really did take place.
And it's going on right before our eyes. And that's why many Democrats realize the real energy going into the next election is with Republicans and especially upset parents and independents who are upset with this, and maybe even some Democrats who are upset with some of the things that they're seeing out there. So they see this as a real problem, and if they don't, my guess is they feel like they have to get this Build Back Better passed in the next few weeks, because in a few weeks we're looking at the end of the year and then we're into the election year, and they feel like there's no chance they get it done then.
No chance.
Yeah. On the critical race theory part of what's happening in Loudoun County, I think I love Governor DeSantis, and part of what he on critical race theory, he just did it really simple, plain English. We're not going to teach our children to hate each other because of the color of their skin, and we're not going to teach them to hate America, which is pretty much what critical race theory is. And so he was, that kind of distilling down, I think, for most parents, and in fact, the videos that go viral are often black parents complaining at the school board, stop teaching my child that his identity or her identity is just as a victim. So I think that is one they have, and they really have a struggle on the left because they have the radical left embedded in all of this. In the 1619, Black Lives Matter, CRT, all the radical, anti-American, racially dividing philosophies. and there's no bridge. There's no bridge between that and rational America, and I think they're really in a world of hurt over it.
We used to talk about the fact that it was really hard for a John Boehner to herd the cats on the Republican side, but it's getting real hard right now for Nancy Pelosi to herd the cats on the Democratic side.
Because as Debbie was pointing out, when you have AOC and some of them, that's the real energy in the Democratic Party.
That's where it is.
I mean, it's to the point where we can only identify really two people in the Democratic Party who, if they are successful in limiting this or if it ends up dying, it may be that Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin actually saved the Democratic Party from doing something that would have been much, much worse and would have been a bigger backlash.
Okay, I have a confession to make. I went to a Joe Manchin fundraiser and I paid to go because I have to tell you, I mean, these people are all serious conservatives and saying he's the guy. He's going to stand up. Now, he has many times said he's going to stand up and kind of wobbles, but he's from a state that needs coal power. They need coal, and so they don't want to hear all this environmental extremism. And these are basic, I don't know, heartland is the right word, but it's a Christian state. It's a rural state, and all of this crazy coming out of AOC just doesn't fly to them. So, he's been fabulous.
As we've been talking about West Virginia, which flipped from red to blue, West Virginia flipped from blue to red.
Right,
I mean, half the state's named after Robert Byrd.
Yeah.
Before I take a phone call, and I do want to get to one on economic issues, always hear people saying, the Republican Party has gone more right and the Democratic Party's gone more left. And the way I answer that is to say, go look at the Republican Party and some of the things in their convention and their platform, even in 2000. And compare it to the most recent one. A little bit of difference. Look at just even the platform for Barack Obama and the most recent one, and you have seen a remarkable shift. And it seems to me that Democrats don't realize how far left they've gone because they live a little bit in an echo chamber. They always accuse conservatives of living in, or Christians or even Republicans live in an echo chamber, but they really do live in an echo chamber and don't realize how radical some of those ideas sound to middle America.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Joe Biden won, because he campaigned as I'm a moderate and I'm not Donald Trump. And those two things sort of attracted a fair number of people. And but he is not, you might have made the case that 20 or 30 years ago, but then back during the, Oliver North hearings, Joe Biden had plagiarized Neil Kinnock, a socialist from England, and that was before you really had the internet, and people figured out that he had plagiarized 6 pages of the socialist comments. And so he stepped down from his campaign.
Yeah. Let's take some phone calls here. We'll go to New Mexico. Vern, I think you want to talk about how we're going to pay for all this. So go for it.
Yeah, I was curious. Just going to like a flat tax, wouldn't that increase the revenue? Then you get rid of the IRS too?
Yeah. What about this idea of a flat tax? We've had Mike Huckabee on and others that have talked about flat tax and fair tax and all the rest. Can you sort that out for us?
We tried to get to that with Ronald Reagan, and we got it down to, I think, was 3 levels, and then immediately they started trying to bump it back up after Reagan was out. So, yes, if you got down to a flat tax, a relatively low rate with a high exclusion, so I think Dick Armey used to have something like $35,000 of first income, and that was from several years ago, would not be taxed.
Right.
But I agree with you. If we went to a flat tax, wealthy people would pay more. Middle income people would pay some, and low income people would pay nothing. And but you would be able to get away from some of this stuff that goes on now, where we pass new taxes, and then we say, let's make sure there's enough exemptions in there so our friends don't get hurt by this, and they can be able to get out from under it and so forth. So I would love to go to a flat tax.
Yeah.
I'd love the flat tax too. What is problematic about it is that, you can have the American left thrives on creating class envy, creating class, division and envy of the wealthy. And even though the reality is, if you had a flat tax, you'd pay more if you earn $10 million than if you earn $10,000. So there is already the built-in, you'd pay more, but it would be so easy for the leftists to spin as, you just got all these rich people, they're not paying any higher rate. I would love it, and I think it's politically impossible.
You always talk about who would say no to it. Well, the IRS would say no to it. Mm-hmm. Of course, special interests would say no to it, but Congress would say no to it, because Dr. Matthews, that's what you're implying. They like to have all those carve-outs and various things, which then benefit individuals in this very arcane and lengthy tax code.
Right, and then that way you don't know who's paying how much, and then they can come up and they can criticize some company if they're not paying, they don't think enough at that time. But yes, they like being able to have those carve-outs.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a couple other issues. We'll talk about the cancel culture real quickly, because that's one of the pieces we have there as well. And, of course, if you find yourself saying, this went too fast, I want to hear it again, well, you can go to our podcast, or if you'd like to talk to either of these individuals, we've got a link to their websites, which we'll talk about before we end, right after this.
With a climate change confab taking place in Glasgow, Scotland, I thought I'd share the response of a woman in perhaps her 60s or 70s to a young grocery clerk who suggested that next time she bring her own reusable grocery bag because, quote, plastic bags are not good for the environment. When the woman apologized, the clerk pointed out that your generation did not care enough to save our environment for future generations. Well, green has become a thing since that lady's childhood. But she listed for the clerk some green things we all used to do to save money and avoid waste. Back then, she said, we returned milk bottles, soda bottles, and beer bottles to the store. The store sent them back to the plant to be washed and sterilized and refilled so it could use the same bottles over and over. So they really were recycled. She explained that people reused brown paper grocery bags, not only for garbage, but to cover our school books. Back then, the lady said, we washed the baby's diapers because we didn't have the throwaway kind. We dried clothes on a line. Wind and solar power really did dry our clothes back in our early days. And, she remembered, people had only one TV in the house, not one in every room. Back then, she said, we didn't fire up an engine and burn gasoline just to cut the lawn. We used a push mower that ran on human power. In fact, she said, we exercised by working, so we didn't need to go to a health club to run on treadmills that operate on electricity. People walked to the grocery store if it was close. Kids walked or rode their bikes to school and to activities, instead of turning their mom into a 24-hour taxi service. Oh, but the climate elites in Glasgow have more grandiose and expensive plans in mind for saving the planet. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, just for a few more minutes, wanted to talk about cancel culture, because one of the articles we've posted here, the cancel culture mob meets resistance. But before we get to that, I thought I'd mention one that I came across the other day, and that is there's a Professor Dorian Abbott, professor of geophysical sciences, University of Chicago, undergraduate degree from Harvard, PhD from Harvard. He was supposed to give this very prestigious John Carlson lecture on climate, which has kind of been in the news, at MIT, and then they decided to cancel him, not because of his views on science, but because of an opinion he co-authored in Newsweek. He argued that the current system we have of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, was really having a negative impact, he said, on the mission of America's universities. So instead, he and the other co-author talked about MFE, merit, fairness, and equality. What a good idea. And even was rejecting the idea that sometimes they use for qualifications legacy, athletic admission, and so even admitted that significantly favored white applicants and really wanted just to come back to merit, fairness, and equality. Well, that was controversial enough, and all of a sudden there was a Twitter storm, and the students and all the trolls and everything came down on the administration and MIT, and that was the end of that, and he was disinvited. But here's the good news. Professor Robert George, who we've had on the program before, at Princeton, heard about the incident. He stepped forward to sponsor the lecture, and then even the New York Times covered it, gave it coverage, and they had thousands and thousands of students show up for the lecture. So I think it's a good illustration. And of course, Debbie, you suggested this article here on the cancel culture mob meets resistance. And of course, one of the examples, of course, would be Major League Baseball. Another one would be Dave Chappelle and Netflix. But I do sense a little bit of a pushback because maybe some of these really sad examples of cancel culture, people are starting to have some courage and standing up saying, no, I'm not going to give in to the mob and I'm not going to give in to the trolls.
I just love the spirit of this. I've talked about this cancel culture thing a lot on my show because I think that, one of the beauties of America's founding, First Amendment, robust debate of ideas. I mean, you can talk to each other. And the cancel culture effort, people used to say, well, it's, they just kind of, they diminished the impact they would have on society, but it's very significant. If you can't have a debate, for example, whether a male who is functioning as a male should be able to dress up in a skirt and use the girls' room and end up, physically assaulting someone, you can't really have a conversation about transgender rights. You can't, transgenderism. You can't have a conversation about, they try to say it on every big issue that not just I disagree with you, but because I disagree with you, you are a fill-in-the-blank homophobe, hater, bigot or something, and you are to be silenced. And so you're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your respect in the community. It does in some points or ways come from the government. It's a private sector, private people enforced silencing. And I love the spirit of so many people in this country saying, not putting up with it, not shutting up. And I think actually it has been a tremendously impactful weapon the left has used to essentially establish, we establish truth. We say, this is truth on climate, this is truth on race, this is truth on genderism, this is truth on COVID, this is truth on vaccines. Nobody else is allowed to have an opinion. It's what Facebook and YouTube and the social media giants do too. And I love this spirit. It's just the human spirit of freedom. I'm not trying to force you to agree with me, but I do get to say what I think. And in our culture, you don't get to shut me down. I love it.
You know what? I spent a lot of time in college having 3 degrees, and I was a slow learner. So we actually loved it then when somebody who had a controversial position or something that we don't, such and such is going to be speaking, we'd go and listen because you wanted to hear what they had to say. Maybe you agreed, maybe you disagreed, but you wanted to go hear those other opinions of people who were knowledgeable and had reasons for basing their opinion on something. And so I'm just mystified why this happens at colleges, because they should be where the students should be rising up saying, no, you cannot cancel this person because you don't agree with it, we want to hear this person.
And again, you're going to have Kim Strassel talking about the growing threat to free speech. And, some of this is not coming from the government. Some is, but it's amazing, as Debbie just mentioned a minute ago, a lot of it's coming from companies. And again, if they own the platform, they can tell you what can go on that platform.
Companies and universities and other places.
I love in this article that you put up, this whole "Let's Go Brandon" thing. so funny, because it came from a NASCAR event where some NBC reporters saying, that people in the background are chanting that they don't like Joe Biden. I won't say the word, but they're anti-Joe Biden. And the reporter tries to say, look, Brandon, the driver she's interviewing, they're saying, let's go Brandon. Obviously they weren't. Everyone could hear they weren't saying that, but it so captured the effort of this leftist mindset. No one's criticizing Joe Biden. Don't be thinking that. Everyone loves him. And so it's just gone. In fact, now in the bottom of In-N-Out cups, they used to have John 3:16. In-N-Out drink cups now have "Let's Go Brandon." Let's go, Brandon.
Oh my goodness.
So funny.
Well, I did not know
California has closed down to In-N-Out.
Yes, it has. That's
because for not enforcing the vaccine. Was that what it was?
Yeah, that's right. We're not checking the vaccine status as people walk in the door. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, the restaurant vaccine status, and so they actually said, okay, well, everyone can eat outside. Yeah. Everyone, and they said, nope, not even that. Can't do that. Can't
but they're saying we're not going to be the government's enforcement arm on this.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is going to be a big issue in the future, and so that is certainly the case. But again, this idea of free speech, again, you can go to ipi.org and you can find some of your articles. You can find out, of course, that opportunity November 16th with Kim Strassel. And, of course, we talk about some of these free speech ideas, and so that is certainly the case. And, Debbie, if we go to America Can We Talk, they'll find any of the articles that you have posted, any of the interviews you've done, right?
Absolutely. And we had a great interview this week with Senator Wendy Rogers, state senator from Arizona. And, she was all over the Arizona audit of their vote. And she's basically saying, the headlines tried to say, oh, look, they recounted and Joe got even more votes. And she's saying, no, if you actually read the report, there are 50 to 60,000 corrupt ballots. So, I mean, we have people like that. We have people talking about the environment and the military. We had Lieutenant General Lohmeyer talking about Marxism invading the military. We talk about the top issues of the day. I always say my show is dedicated to saving America. I don't talk about sports. I don't talk about fashion. I talk about issues that save this enormously consequential, precious country.
Let me just mention one of the articles we didn't get to, but since you mentioned Let's Go Brandon, it's one of the things that Daniel Davidson talks about in terms of how the elites are losing control. And so that's just another argument, because I want people to feel that there are some things that they can do. And part of the action items, of course, that we give to you so often are where you can contact your member of Congress. Next week, we'll probably pick out something else to give you an action item. And of course, if you'd like to see some of the videos and other resources, they're all available at the website pointofview.net. Dr. Merrill Matthews, next Thursday, I'm going to be speaking in Kansas, and you have Molly Hemingway.
Molly Hemingway coming on for the second hour to talk about her new book, and Dr. Sterling Burnett to talk about COP26. We'll talk about the climate summit going on in Scotland.
So we're going to talk about climate change and a rigged election. Isn't that the name of her book? Rigged?
Something like that.
Yeah, so there you go. So we're going to have lots of things to cover. And next week, you're going to be talking about some very important issues and with various people, aren't you?
Absolutely. Sidney Powell, who is just still on fire about election integrity. She's participating in the creation of this lawsuit to be filed. So Sidney Powell is joining me. I have a military guy who's formed a movement to basically say to restore individuals' inspiration for confidence, speak up for what you believe in. I have Jaco Boyens coming on Thursday, all of his stuff about sex trafficking and such. So yeah, it's a busy, fun week.
And again, I'll have Robert Morgan and Corey Miller and a few others. So you've got lots to look forward to on any one of those programs, but we're simply out of time. Want you to enjoy your weekend. Want to thank Andrew for his help as an engineer and Steve for his help as a producer. Have a great weekend. We look forward to seeing you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.